The CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Severide in Washington, Roger Mudd in Washington, Morton Dean in Nashville, Bill Plant in Detroit, Nelson Benton in Grand Rapids, Richard Threlkeld in Tong Duc, South Vietnam, and Bob Gregory in Washington.
Good evening. Unable to win the filibuster against Abe Fortas today, the Senate set aside, perhaps permanently, his nomination to be Chief Justice of the United States. The first floor vote test of the nomination failed by an even greater margin than anticipated. Only 45 senators favored cutting off debate and 43 opposed. Roger Mudd reports.
The opposition to Fortas was so strong today that the Senate leadership, the president, and the justice himself would seem to have no other choice than to withdraw the nomination. The administration needed 59 votes. It got 45, 14 votes short of the necessary two-thirds. But even if the 9 absentees who are willing to take a position had been present today, the administration would have failed by 15 votes. The big winner in all of this is probably Republican Robert Griffin of Michigan, who after a little more than 2 years in the Senate, succeeded in embarrassing and mousetrapping his own party leadership. He was asked today if the president should now withdraw the nomination.
Yes, I definitely do. I think the vote today, being as close as it is, demonstrates the extent of division and controversy that surrounds this nomination, and that it would be in the best interest of the court and the country if he would withdraw it.
Republican leader Dirksen, who joined the anti-Fortas bloc only last week, also thinks the nomination is dead.
Well, it means that in the ordinary course of Senate deliberation, you just don't get to the nomination.
Senator, do you think the leadership of Senator Griffin of Michigan in helping to kill off this nomination performed a real public service?
Whenever things are disclosed that have an impact on the national interest, obviously, that constitutes a public service. And I think that they did.
But earlier, when he was asked the same question about Griffin, Dirksen replied, well, I don't think it was a disservice, an indication of the friction between the two men. The one issue which so aroused public sentiment against Fortas was the attempt by some of the opponents to link Fortas and the court with the availability of obscene movies. As late as yesterday afternoon, under the sponsorship of Republican Miller of Iowa, there was another film showing in the Capitol building. Democrat Hart of Michigan was asked for comment.
Well, I've indicated I thought it was as close to obscenity as you could come. Sit around and watch some dirty movies and decide who's going to be Chief Justice.
Majority Leader Mansfield will announce Thursday whether to withdraw the nomination, but it will be an anticlimax to today's crushing defeat. Roger Mudd, CBS News, Washington.
The White House said President Johnson still believes a majority of the Senate would confirm Fortas if permitted to vote directly on the nomination itself rather than on procedure as today. The spokesman said he knows of no plans to withdraw the nomination.
She dreams again of the man she met. Something about him she can't forget.
There's something about an apple.
When he held her close, it was very clear. Something about him made him nice to be near.
There's something about an apple.
The aftershave girls can't forget. Aqua Velva. Have you tried it yet?
There's something about an aqua.
Hi there. So what's he doing in my shop with his electric razor and Williams electric shave? Okay, so the electric shave does make your whiskers stand up. So it does lubricate your face and give you a close, comfortable shave. So, a shave that feels barber close with your electric razor? Sure enough. Look for the big L. First letter in.
The spokesman for Ho Chi Minh said today that Hanoi would not accept terms put forward by Vice President Humphrey for an end to the bombing of North Vietnam. The vice president said last night that as president, he would halt the air war if the communists gave evidence of a willingness to restore the demilitarized zone. In Paris, a top-ranking member of the North Vietnamese delegation said he saw nothing new in that proposal. He told reporters, it's still the same demand for reciprocity which we reject. Campaigning today in Tennessee, Humphrey declined to elaborate on his Vietnam speech. He concentrated instead on winning Southern votes from Richard Nixon and George Wallace.
The diversity of the modern presidential campaign. Yesterday, the candidate was serenaded by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Salt Lake City. Today, the strum of something called 9-pound hammer reminds the candidate he's in Nashville's Country Music Hall of Fame. Later, an appearance in Memorial Square. Humphrey bids for Tennessee's 11 electoral votes, a state carried by Richard Nixon in 1960, by Lyndon Johnson in 64, where George Wallace looms as a threat in 68, and where Humphrey could run a poor third. In the attentive crowd, evidence that Humphrey's Vietnam address last night may have converted some demonstrators who, in other cities, have disrupted several of his recent campaign appearances. However, a few unfriendly signs did appear.
Last night, I spoke to this nation about the hard facts of war and peace. I gave you a plan for peace in Vietnam, and I gave you a plan for peace in the world, and I'd like to hear from the opposition what they have in mind.
In this southern state where George Wallace is so strong, Humphrey let fly with bitter criticism of the former Alabama governor.
He did some very interesting things as governor. Alabama housewives paid the highest sales tax in the country. 6 cents on the dollar. Now, is that what you want? You can get it. You can get it. And if that's what you want, you'll get it. Wages for the working man in Alabama were the 3rd lowest in the nation. All right, Mr. Worker, is that what you want? You can get it. All you got to do is mess around here a little longer, and you'll get it. And in education, there are only 2 states that spend less per pupil than in Alabama. So mothers and fathers, if that's what you want for your children, you can get it. Just go ahead and mess around and vote for it. That's all. You'll get it.
In a speech prepared for delivery in Knoxville, Tennessee, later this evening, Mr. Humphrey launches into his strongest attack yet on former Alabama Governor George Wallace, referring to him as the apostle of hate and racism. Morton Dean, CBS News, with the Humphrey campaign in Nashville, Tennessee.
The White House declined comment on Humphrey's Vietnam position, beyond saying that all candidates should speak out on all issues. Silent, too, was Senator Eugene McCarthy. He said he may comment next week. Richard Nixon, however, at a Detroit news conference, called for Humphrey to clarify his remarks on a bombing halt. And Bill Plant reports.
Nixon called the Humphrey statement his opponent's 4th or possibly 5th different position on the bombing, recalling that Humphrey had earlier agreed with him, no bombing halt without reciprocal action by Hanoi. And he said that unless clarified, the offer could destroy the only trump card the U.S. has in the talks.
The representatives of the government at Hanoi read everything that is said by prominent political figures in the United States, and including editorials, and particularly by presidential candidates. And I think that it is possible, very possible, that the men in Hanoi could interpret this particular statement as offering them a concession in January that they could not get now. It is possible. I do not charge it. And I think that he ought to clear up that possibility, which he can do with a very forthright statement, that all he was attempting to do in making his statement was simply to say that in January he would negotiate exactly on exactly the same basis that President Johnson is negotiating now, that there would have to be some sort of action, word or deed on the part of the Hanoi government before he would agree to a bombing halt. He either has to be for the bombing halt, as some of his prospective supporters and present supporters want him to be, or he has to support the negotiators in Paris, as he indicated in his statement that he would. And at the present time, I'm not sure which side he's on, and I think he leaves it very much in doubt.
Richard Nixon is obviously now very much aware that whatever the vice president meant exactly, this could develop into a brand new ballgame. It is not unexpected. The Nixon staff has been waiting for the Humphrey camp to make some sort of dramatic move in an effort to reunite the party, and it has come. They think that they can handle it. Bill Plant, CBS News, with the Nixon campaign in Detroit.
This is living. Some people think there's a better way. If you're independent, you set your own style. You don't follow the crowd. You find a better something, including a better tasting cigarette, perhaps. Old Gold Filters. The cigarette for independent people. Old Gold Filters. A delicious mixture of rich tobacco flavors. Flavors that never came through a filter before. Something extra, too. Gift Star coupons.
Gift coupons? They're for her. It's the flavor I'm after. Why smoke them if you can't taste them?
Old Gold Filters. The cigarette for independent people. With Gift Star coupons. Same coupon that comes on fresh-tasting menthol Spring 100s.
A New York judge today overruled city officials and granted George Wallace use of Shea Stadium for a rally next week. The city had contended that policy ruled out political events in the 56,000-seat stadium, home of the baseball Mets and the football Jets, and also used for such events as concerts by the Beatles. But the judge said he could imagine fewer events of greater civic, community, or general public interest than an appearance by a major presidential candidate. The city says it will appeal the decision. Wallace today campaigned in another northern state, Michigan. Nelson Benton reports.
Motorcading through Michigan, George Wallace encountered large crowds today, but his heckle quotient was on the rise, too. The third-party candidate attracted more than 8,000 people to a mid-morning stadium rally in Grand Rapids. His audience, though, was about two-thirds for Wallace and one-third opposed. In fact, the former Alabama governor was barely through the preamble to his standard political speech when there was a prolonged interruption.
I'm going to go home a little later.
There were two great chants of "We Want Wallace," and the two slogans bounced off each other up and down the bleachers. Then, Wallace turned to the hecklers and said what he and others had been thinking for a long time.
Well, really, I appreciate your activity because you've gotten me 500,000 votes today here in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Dissenters, protesters, pickets are very much a part of every phase of Campaign 68. It's said that Mr. Nixon has few pickets, but Mr. Humphrey is bothered by them. But George Wallace thrives on them, and they on him. Nelson Benton, CBS News, with the Wallace campaign in Michigan.
In Panama City, Florida, Donnell Brookins broadcast news, weather, and a morning variety program on station WJHG-TV. Brookins also is the Democratic candidate for county tax collector. But the federal equal time rule now has cost Brookins his job and given his Republican rival, George Logue Jr., 22 hours of free broadcast time. The FCC ruled Logue could have equal time for every minute Brookins was on the air. The station has let Brookins go to keep Logue from piling up any more free time, which he's using in twice-a-day broadcasts. The Presidential Board of Inquiry is looking into a longshoreman strike which halted all but military shipping operations in Atlantic and Gulf ports last midnight. The government hopes to ask for a Taft-Hartley injunction later this week to send the strikers back to work for an 80-day cooling-off period. The nation's railroads have said for years that they lose money on passenger service, but the Interstate Commerce Commission concluded today that it isn't so. The ICC said railroads made $35 million from passenger service in the last 14 years, despite operating deficits reported in 6 of those years. An industry spokesman accused the commission of using, quote, mathematical chicanery in drawing up its report. The Dow Jones Industrial Average hit a new high for the year today as prices advanced on the New York Stock Exchange. The volume was 15.5 million shares. The exchange index gained 11 cents.
Introducing the waste meter. It shows that an executive who dictates to a secretary instead of to IBM dictation equipment,
Frost Guild Incorporated,
which is nearly twice as fast, wastes 20 cents a letter. And a secretary who types, erases, and retypes wastes 85 cents. Because she could do it in just about half the time, including revisions, on a remarkable IBM typewriter, the MTST. Together, they waste $1.05 on every business letter.
It's about time.
Which brings us to the corporation waste meter. It shows that 100 people, each writing just 5 letters a day, waste $126,000 a year. Which brings us to your IBM Office Products Division representative, who can show people how to stop wasting time and corporations how to stop wasting people. Call him.
A South Vietnamese spokesman in Saigon said today that 400,000 enemy troops have been killed since U.S. forces entered the war in 1961. American combat dead in the same period totaled more than 28,000, while the government toll was put at 95,000. Some military men question the government figures on communist losses, arguing they are exaggerated through estimates when an actual body count is not possible. In the war today, the major action still centered on a U.S. Special Forces camp southwest of Da Nang, which has been under communist attack now for 4 days. Earlier in the week, Allied units tried to root out some enemy soldiers in villages near the outpost, and CBS newsman Richard Threlkeld and a camera crew went with them.
2 companies of Special Forces troops, Montagnard mercenaries, and a handful of American advisors, helicoptered into the marshy grassland assigned to clear out a nest of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops who have been harassing almost every night the nearby Special Forces camp of Tung Duc. The intelligence people say these villagers are Viet Cong sympathizers, so the Montagnards waste no time setting fire to their storage huts. Living quarters are spared, those that are still left standing after the airstrikes. Miraculously, these villagers have escaped the rockets, the bombs, and the bullets. They are driven ahead of the assault force to protect the assault force against booby traps and sniper fire. The lead elements of the assault found the enemy in the second village, sniper fire and mortars in a graveyard. The Montagnards charged the sniper positions and lost 2 dead and 8 wounded. In the third village, Duc Thai, there was the bulk of the enemy force, in good number and well entrenched, fighting with their backs to the river. In the close quarters fighting that followed, CBS News cameraman Tran Kim was wounded by machine gun fire. A can of news film and his tape recorder stopped what might have been a fatal bullet. This reporter was nicked by an enemy slug. CBS News cameraman Sean Flynn risked his life on several occasions to film the scenes that follow.
All right, follow,
Airstrikes were called in, but the fighting was just too close. The fight continued yard by yard, almost every step costing a casualty. Until finally the assault force could advance no further. An enemy machine gun bunker blocked the way. Grenades were tossed. Then, in a last-ditch effort, a gas attack. Anti-riot gas saturated the bunker, but that failed too. There were a few enemy dead, but the machine gun never stopped chattering. So the Special Forces pulled back. By morning, after an all-night march through communist-infested marshland, what was left of the Special Forces reached the relative safety of Tung Duc, while the jets and artillery went to work on the enemy villages. The Special Forces and the enemy fought this operation to a standoff. All that remained was to tend to the wounded and wait for another day. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, Tung Duc, South Vietnam.
Hundreds of thousands of Chinese marched through the streets of Peking today to mark the 19th anniversary of communist rule, to show solidarity with Mao Zedong. But there were warnings of new purges to come. Peking's major newspaper said Mao's Cultural Revolution must be extended so that it can, quote, purify all 17 million members of China's Communist Party. Russia, from all indications, suffered a political setback at a meeting of 58 communist parties in Hungary today. The group was supposed to have made preparations for a World Communist Summit in Moscow next month, but voted instead to postpone it. Informants said the main reason was the deep division among party chiefs over the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. It was reported in Moscow today that more than 25,000 Soviet businesses now are allowed to retain profits for reinvestment, double the number reported only 2 months ago. Observers note that it's hardly a movement toward Western-style capitalism, since the state still owns the means of production and controls output. But it is seen as further evidence of decentralization in the Soviet economy under a system first introduced by Nikita Khrushchev. The House Committee on Un-American Activities began a hearing today on possible subversive involvement in the Chicago disorders during the Democratic Convention. And on hand were some of the same protesters who disrupted a committee hearing 2 years ago. Bob Gregory reports.
The latest confrontation between the House Un-American Activities Committee and its yippie critics went smoothly most of the day. But late this afternoon, they, along with their lawyers, about 14 in all, were ordered removed from the hearing room. Their ejection followed minor attempts to disrupt the meeting, sometimes with muffled laughter, other times with their attorneys demanding points of order. Finally, one attorney decided to stand in silent protest. When he was joined by all the others, the order came for removal. So they got the showdown they wanted, and despite frequent accusations and loud, profane language that Washington was another Chicago, the security force was always restrained. No nightsticks were ever raised. 15 policemen and 12 federal marshals were inside the room. 25 more were outside in the corridor. Still others were in reserve. They were there to counter yippie threats of recent days that thousands of demonstrators would flock to Washington to turn the hearings into a carnival, but only a handful showed up. The yippies will testify Thursday. Today it was friendly witnesses, one staff assistant and 2 Chicago policemen, who said subversive elements were allegedly involved in the Chicago demonstrations. Subcommittee Chairman Richard Eichord believes the hearings may produce one concrete result.
I think one possible piece of legislation that might come out of the hearings is federal legislation to protect the federal election processes, as also the convention procedures. Many of the groups, such as SDS, the Mobilization Committee Against the War in Vietnam, the yippies have boasted that they're going to do all within their power to try to disrupt the elections in November.
The yippie hero of the day was Jerry Rubin, who calls himself the Clown Prince of protest. He tried to enter the hearing room with 100 rounds of live ammunition, part of his plan to break up everything with jokes. But as he was led away, no one laughed, not even Rubin. Bob Gregory, CBS News, Washington.
In San Antonio, Texas, 46 Mexicans were found last night locked in a steamy, unventilated truck abandoned on a residential street. 2 of the men died and 11 are hospitalized from their 13-hour ordeal. The Mexicans said they crossed the border illegally and got into the rented truck, believing they would be taken to jobs in Chicago. The truck driver has not been found. Patrick Cardinal of Boyle today announced penalties for 39 priests in the Washington area who have dissented from Pope Paul's recent ruling against artificial birth control. Punishment ranged from not being allowed to hear confessions to being forbidden to either teach or preach. The Archbishop said the penalties need not be permanent if the priests will agree to accept the Pope's encyclical. The Vatican called today for an international dialogue to include atheists and in some cases communists in an effort to make the world, as the Vatican put it, more human. The appeal came in a major policy-making document from the Vatican Secretariat for Non-Believers, which comes after a long history of official church distrust of any atheists.
You know what sets Bayer aspirin apart from the other pain-relieving products that claim to be faster and stronger? The shape? Nope. The size? Nope. It's just that Bayer is 100% aspirin, and aspirin is the strongest pain reliever you can buy. No matter how you look at it, Bayer is all aspirin, and no one has ever found a way to improve on aspirin. That's why Bayer works wonders for just about anything that hurts, from your aching head right down to your aching feet. So when someone asks you what sets Bayer aspirin apart from other pain-relieving products, give it to them straight. Tell them Bayer is 100% aspirin, and aspirin is the strongest pain reliever you can buy. Bayer works wonders.
Now to Eric Severide in Washington for some thoughts on Hubert Humphrey's Vietnam position and the background of it. Eric?
In terms of the speeches, the Humphrey address of last night is clearly the most important development of the presidential campaign so far. It was a signal beamed over the head of President Johnson, who was not consulted in advance, and aimed at the McCarthy-Kennedy Democrats at home and at the enemy in Hanoi. Its ultimate effects are not clear, of course, but it has already brought some Democratic dissidents further into the Humphrey fold, led by Senator Edward Kennedy. On the reasoning, which is quite possibly faulty, that a favorable break in Vietnam will give the Democratic Party a real chance in November, the signal to Hanoi is this: make a positive move toward peace now and negotiate an end to the slaughter next year with Humphrey, or take your chances with Nixon. One effect of last night's speech is to leave Mr. Nixon closer to the Johnson hardline on the war than is Mr. Johnson's vice president. Humphrey's position on ending the bombing of North Vietnam is described in much of the press today as essentially no different from the administration position, because the president has said from time to time that almost any advance gesture from Hanoi would suffice for him to end the bombing. But the fact seems to be that our actual bargaining demands in the Paris talks are tougher than these public remarks. On the question of the misnamed demilitarized buffer zone, for example, the administration demands that it be completely sealed off. Humphrey would ask that the enemy not station troops in the zone or fire across it, but he would not insist that Hanoi cease infiltrating troops through the zone. That apparently amounts to a demand that Hanoi abandon some of its units in the south, which Hanoi will never agree to. Humphrey has picked the DMZ question as a testing point and as bait to Hanoi, because it seems to be the easiest point of mutual agreement, carrying the least risk to either side. In the background of Humphrey's move is the concealed drama of a deeply, heatedly divided administration. Several intimate and influential presidential advisers have joined the ranks of those convinced that a stop to the bombing of North Vietnam is the only possible way to get serious peace negotiations going, and that it will have that effect. Against them, in demanding an explicit quid pro quo from Hanoi in advance, are Secretary Rusk, leading generals, and Ambassador Bunker in Saigon, who worries about the morale of the Vietnamese government. And the natural attitude of the field soldiers in the northernmost corps, who worry about tomorrow, not next year, is expressed in letters to the President from his Marine son-in-law, Captain Robb, whose private influence has apparently become a real factor in this backstage drama of fateful proportions. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, October 1st, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
What causes my heartburn, my indigestion?
In your stomach, excess acid may build, and build can cause acid indigestion, heartburn, that burning sensation. But Rolaids, with its exclusive buffering compound, has thousands of absorbent particles. Each consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid. Gives fast, lasting relief. Rolaids consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid.
You know, this is the biggest reunion yet, Myrtle.
How many grandchildren for you, Len?
There's Jenny for fifth. You know, she doesn't warm up to me, though. Acts like I had bad breath.
I have the answer to that, Len. Listerine. It kills germs that can cause bad breath and lasts for hours.
I'll give her a whirl.
Looks like Granddad's pretty popular now.
That sure do it, Myrtle.
Well, Listerine helped.
Listerine Antiseptic kills germs, keeps breath fresh for hours.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Meet the men...